This is a CBC podcast. Want a weekly roundup of the best CBC radio programming? Subscribe to the CBC Radio 1 newsletter. Get a digest of the week's top stories, read in-depth articles, listen to interviews and documentaries, and get the lowdown on upcoming stories from CBC Radio 1 that you need to hear. To subscribe, go to cbc.ca/radio and look for the subscribe button. The CBC Radio 1 newsletter. Be informed.
Danse, Anine, Boujou, hello and welcome. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. Well, it's the most important season in the country, the NHL playoffs. Hockey is a celebrated sport with a long history on this side of the border. We play, we watch, we debate, and we love every moment on the ice. And hockey crosses cultural barriers, too. You'll find the game being played on res rinks, lakes, and ponds all over Indigenous country. And more players are breaking through to professional levels. But it's not without its challenges, too. Today on Unreserved, in the words of Stompin' Tom Connors, the good old hockey game is the best game you can name. And the best game you can name is the good old hockey game. Everybody's singing along now. I got that song stuck in your head. You're welcome. It was a first in hockey history, and Indigenous fans loved every minute. Last month, Enoch Cree Nation hosted Hometown Hockey, its first ever visit to a reserve. The broadcast from the reserve also coincided with a monumental NHL broadcast in the Plains Cree language. The weekend was a celebration of Indigenous people and their deep ties to hockey. But many saw it as more than a celebration. It was also a step toward partnership. Our Kyle Musica made the trip out to Enoch to cheer along with fans.
Wading through all the kids outside the Enoch Recreation Center, I met 8-year-old Gordy Ward. He's from Enoch Cree Nation, and I asked him what hometown hockey was all about.
It's basically just a thing where people travel around the world and hockey stuff around Canada, and yeah, it's actually pretty fun.
What's been your favorite part so far?
The ball hockey and the shooting accuracy.
Oh, nice. How'd you do in the shooting accuracy?
I got 45 points in 31 seconds.
Holy smokes. How do you think I would do it? I'm not very good.
0-0.
Yeah, probably. So Gordy kind of roasted me there, but I kind of set myself up for it. I tracked down Enoch Cree Nation Chief Billy Morin, who was so busy that weekend that he had an up-to-the-minute schedule. I asked him what he saw.
I see reconciliation. Grand Chief Wilton Littlechild is a champion of reconciliation, but he also says now we're moving into reconciliation. So you have people from Whitewood Mest, you have people from the city of Edmonton, you have people from Spruce Grove, you have people from multiple organizations coming together, First Nations and other communities, and that's what I see, people coming together in the spirit of moving forward in reconciliation.
Each NHL season, Hometown Hockey has 24 episodes. That's 24 Sundays where the crew goes to a specific community and celebrates hockey by hosting a series of fun events, alumni games, and share stories on their live broadcast during the intermissions of the Sunday night game. The event was lively. There was music, games for kids like the shooting accuracy Gordy mentioned that he would have roasted me at earlier, some of the best rink food money could buy. But for a community with such deep ties to hockey, hometown hockey means so much more. Shane Peacock looks at one of the many team photos hung up in the Enoch Recreation Center. He's in one, but is a bit fuzzy on the details.
I can't remember exactly what our names are. I think we were the Cubs. So that was a fun year. We won a lot of tournaments. We had a really close-knit group there. Same people I'm looking at are the same ones I deal with on a daily basis, and it's great to look back at that memory.
These photos overlook the rink, where teams from all over Treaty 6 got together to play. Peacock, who played professional hockey in Germany and is now a band counselor with the nation, was instrumental in bringing the event home. Hosting the event is pretty remarkable, considering the Enoch Cree Hockey Association is only in its 4th year. Jordan Cordepat is the president of the association, which he balances with coaching, taking care of his kids, and night business school. He's burning the candle at both ends, he says. but being able to provide opportunities for his and other kids makes it all worth it.
It's really special for me in particularly because I grew up without a father. He, like I said, in and out of jail, and I had some pretty good role models around that, kind of stepped in and helped here and there, some uncles. And for me, just to have that opportunity with my kids is very special, coaching and spending the time with them. Those are things that, as a child that I wanted, and unfortunately it didn't happen. Life goes on, and, I was fine, but I think it's a little extra special for me to be able to do that because I know what I missed out on, and I just want to give them the best that I can possibly give for them to have a good life and to be happy.
Chief Tony Alexis from the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation was being stopped every 5 seconds by somebody new to talk to. The hockey community is small, the community in and around Enoch even smaller. He had just finished watching some young members of his nation play in the kids' tournament. He hopes an event like Hometown Hockey can spur other events in neighboring First Nations.
We would love to host one of these. Unfortunately, we don't have a skating rink. I mean, we're here to support. Alexis is here to support Enoch. Other First Nation communities are here to support Enoch. Other Indigenous communities are here to support Enoch. And even everybody in general who loves hockey is here to support Enoch and what they've done.
Now, in supporting Enoch, surrounding First Nations are promoting the sport, too. Not that it needed much promoting in the community anyway. But what did need more promotion, Chief Morin says, was the possibility hockey could bring.
The world's bigger than the reserve. We're a 4x5 mile box, and as close as we are to the city of Edmonton, there's still barriers there that exist in mentally and socially. So when people come in to our nation, and no matter where they're from, and we're using hockey as a catalyst, it shows them that there's a bigger world out there. There's a bigger world in terms of creating relationships with just friends on their other hockey teams. There's a Stanley Cup. There's NHL players. There's NHL alumni. They can be one of them one day. And I think it's just great that our youth are seeing the vision come to them for a brighter future off the reserve.
With Hometown Hockey, Chief Morin hopes more Indigenous kids see that brighter future off the reserve. Jordan Kortepat did just that. But after his playing career was over, he moved back to the reserve. He wanted to help young people see the same opportunities he did through hockey. Was hockey sort of an escape for you?
Definitely. I guess a lot of my peers, my cousins, a lot of my good friends, they ended up going down the wrong path. Not all of them, but a chunk of them went down the wrong path. And I hate to say it, I was probably heading down there too. It was just one of those things that it was kind of a norm for myself and my family that, sometimes people will go down the road of getting in trouble, some will bounce back. And for me, I was lucky that hockey was my outlet and my escape. And I chose to go down that path instead of choosing some destructive path or a path, I guess, that would lead you to jail or worse. So I'm very fortunate I got to play and escape that type of lifestyle.
Shane Peacock knows that escape route well, but he too moved back to the community. That brighter future off reserve often seems to lead back home. And for Peacock, that home is the rink.
Every time I come in this, I have a sense into the building. I have a sense of pride. It is truly the heart of the community. Everybody in the nation's been to the rec center or the gym side for some kind of event, and that's when we talk about hometown hockey. This is the place to be for us, and it's the heart of our community.
That was Kyle Musica out in Enoch Cree Nation just west of Edmonton during their hometown hockey event. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild, talking all about the good old game of hockey on the show today. Hockey teams start somewhere, on a backyard rink, in a community center, or on a frozen lake. But how do you start a hockey team when there's no ice time, no equipment, and a group of kids who've never even played the game?
We didn't play hockey. We just started when our first coach asked us if we wanted a girls' hockey team. We played out on the lake. Nothing. Just skates and a hockey stick. My name is Tanisha Raven. I'm 13. I'm forward.
Tanisha plays for Res Girls 64, an all-girls team in Yemeton First Nation. Res Girls 64 started playing on a patch of ice cleared from the lake next to the reserve. It's a small fly-in First Nation in northern Ontario, about an hour from Thunder Bay by plane. As people started to hear about the team, they wanted to help. Donated equipment was shipped in, private donors, and a GoFundMe account raised $90,000 for a new ice surface.
I don't know, we were really happy when we were having a practice on the lake, and then a truck came down and told us there was hockey coming in a trailer.
Last month, the team flew to Kingston to play in their third ever tournament. When Allison Norman, the team's manager, saw the girls on the ice, she was thrilled.
I feel like a mom. I feel super proud. I get all teary, and I'm not a crier. And I mean, last year when they scored their first goal was amazing. And then this year to see them score 3 goals in the first game was awesome, because last year they only scored 2 goals all season. So in one game to be able to score 3 goals is just great. And I'm just so proud of them, and I love watching them out there.
Katie Koopman helped facilitate fundraising projects to get the Res Girls from Fort Hope to the Kids for Kids tournament.
It is just to see what these girls love to do is be on the ice. They light up. They're so excited. It's just what they want to do. And I love that they have been so welcomed by the hockey community in Kingston, by the Kingston Ice Wolves. This is where they need to be.
The first game, they were all shy. They didn't even want to leave the dressing room after they dressed up, right? And they said, there's people out there. And I'm like, that's what hockey is about, I said. I'm from Fort Hope. My name is Leo Adlucan. I've coached hockey for about 25 years now, about there. They've worked together. That's the whole part of what I wanted to teach them, right? Is you can overcome anything that you put your mind to and your heart, right? And I keep telling the girls that, like, just put your mind and your heart in it. You will overcome, and you will get better and better as a person. And that's what I try to teach them, right, is working together and being better. Like I always tell them, be good, do good. You're going to make people good.
At the tournament, the girls lost every game they played, but they scored 3 goals in one game, the most they've ever scored in a single match. They even got to meet Toronto Maple Leafs forward Mitch Marner while they were there. Not too bad for the team's third tournament. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild, talking all about hockey on the show today. Now, what if I told you some people say hockey has Indigenous roots?
I'm confident that our ancestors and the oral history they shared and their conviction that the Mi'kmaq invented hockey, I believe them. I believe them. And I have no reason not to.
More on that in just a few minutes. Hockey isn't all about getting pucks into the net, making big saves, and staying out of the box. Racism is still a huge problem in hockey, from the major leagues right down to peewee teams. Last May, players on a First Nations hockey team were called savages at a tournament in Quebec City. Support poured in after their coach, Tommy Neposh, posted videos of the taunts online. A lot has happened since last year. Tommy Neposh is here to tell us more. Hello, Tommy.
Hi, Rosanna. Yes.
So take me back to that day. You're in Quebec City for a AAA tournament. Who was with you? And what were the ages of these players?
There were like 12, 13, 14 around there.
So all very young teenagers.
Oh, yeah. These are all Indigenous kids that left their reserves to go play elite hockey down south. When we first got in, I told my son to go check the schedule, and he said, Dad, I feel popular. And I asked him why. Everyone was staring at me. That's the first day, first minute we were at the arena.
At what point during the tournament did you start to notice a change in what was happening on the ice?
I saw my boys walking through the dressing room. You can see the hall where the rooms are, and there's like 4 or 5 boys peeking out. And my son went to a French school when he was young, and he understood what they were saying, and he said, look at these guys. Look at how they dress. Look at how they look. Mm-hmm. So once we started playing, I noticed the ref was onto us all the time, like these little things that our players did that were uncalled for, and he didn't call the other team. That was the first period where we dominated the game.
So when your team started winning, what was the response from the other team?
After the end of the first game, they started naming the game star, and one of my defense, his name is Julian Marshall, he caught something, and I've noticed right away, these kids were doing the war cry. You know, the something like that. Mm-hmm. The refs were laughing, the coach was just laughing, and the parents started doing the tomahawk chop towards our players, the parents of that team. Mm-hmm. So Julian approached the ref and he says, do you see this? And the tournament says 0 tolerance.
Now, at one of the later games at the tournament, you recorded some of what was happening on the ice. Let's hear a bit of that.
He calls it again. A little hit like that. Gang de sauvage. Gang des racistes. Oh oui.
So, Tommy, we can hear some commotion going on. What can you tell us what's happening in this clip that we just heard?
Wow, it just brought back a lot of things. Well, I was sitting behind my team's bench. You know, that's where I was sitting, and I was sitting with one of the mothers. And as I was watching the game and recording the game, I hear one of the fans screaming "Gang de Sauvage," and I filmed him. And it's a really common racial slur in Quebec. Gang de Sauvage means like we're savages and crazy Indians. And I also noticed most of the parents, like all the fans, the parents did the tomahawk chop towards our players. And when I went out downstairs to the dressing room, I saw a boy sitting in the corner and crying.
So one of your players, Julian Marshall, you mentioned him earlier, spoke to CBC about his experience at the tournament.
Yeah.
I just want to take a listen to what he said.
At the end of the first game, both teams lined it up and on the blue line, right? And they did, you know, like when you put your hand over your mouth and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. The whole team did that. This was almost every game there was some sort of remarks. I actually went really calmly and politely to one of the linesmen, and I was like, I'm sorry, are you seeing this? This is racist. This is wrong. And like that linesman said, what are you talking about? Go back and line up on the blue line. You know what I mean? Like kind of just like saying like if I was in the wrong for doing that.
Tommy, what's it like for you to hear that from one of your players?
Well, he was one of the guys that stood up in the room and spoke to the boys. He said, come on, guys, forget about it. We shouldn't, we're here and we almost made it through, so don't worry about it, And Julian is a good kid.
I can hear the frustration in your voice, Tommy, and my heart breaks for, such young people having to face that kind of that kind of words. So when the story did get out in the media, what kind of support or reaction did you get from people?
Oh, we didn't expect to have that much support like that. Once I got that contact from Todd Woodcroft from the Winnipeg Jets, assistant coach. Mm-hmm. Todd Woodcroft? What? are you serious? And he said, yeah. This is Tom Wilcox speaking, you know, and I was like, with his coachable voice, you know, I was like, okay. And once he got to me and he said, I'd like to do something for the boys, and I was like, wow, when would you be able to do it? Then I just told the boys, would you guys come to a practice in Ottawa? And all the boys jumped in. Each and every one of the players jumped in, and they said, we want to be part of it.
I also understand that you received some support from an NHL player. What was that? Tell me about that.
I was driving home from my reserve, and I was driving on the road, and I got an inbox from the messenger. And it was Bonnie O'Reilly, the mother of Ryan O'Reilly. And she invited us to the Ottawa Senators game to meet up with Ryan and throw some encouraging words towards our players and everything.
How are the boys?
After the incident, we kind of stuck together, got the boys together. The bonds got stronger. They got closer, and they played together. And I said, you guys are going to probably face this for the rest of your life if you want to go chase that NHL dream, you know, or a professional hockey dream. And I told the boys, don't worry, we'll get back at it next year. So everybody's all excited to start the season, and they want to play.
Thank you so much for your time today, Tommy.
No problem. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all your support.
That's Tommy Neposh, coach of the First Nation elites, who faced racist taunts at a tournament in Quebec City last May. Hockey is thriving in many remote communities, including Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, the home of Jordan Tutu. Tutu recently retired from the NHL, having been the first Inuk to make it to the league. But his incredible journey from Rankin to the NHL wasn't without struggles with addiction, which almost ended his career.
Well, I think, I picked up my first drink when I was 14 years old. Like I said, it was around the house quite often, and, obviously every kid wants to experiment, and my days in juniors, it probably escalated a little bit more, and then moving on into the NHL, being 20 years old, 21, living on your own, basically no one looking after you. I think it really escalated even more, and trying to deal with the passing of my brother and blocking everything out, it just intensified and got worse, and came to a point where it was either my career or eventually be 6 feet under, and I, chose to end one cycle to start a new cycle. In sobriety, a lot of people think it gets easier. Trust me, it's a grind. The first couple of years for me, it was tough. I didn't realize how many people I affected throughout my drinking days, and like you said, it's been a little over 8 years, and I wouldn't have what I have now if I didn't change my life. I have a beautiful wife, Jennifer. We have 2 healthy girls, Sienna and Avery, that are my Stanley Cups. It's just been a thrill and a joy every day to be around them, and just to be a part of their life on a daily basis. My wife Jen has been through thick and thin with me and by my side, and I count on her every day to lift me up and to help guide me through some of the toughest days.
You can read and hear more about Jordan Tutu's story on our website, cbc.ca/unreserved. There's a long history of debate about where hockey was born. Some say it started on Long Pond outside Windsor, or Montreal, or even England. But could it be a Mi'kmaq invention? A new documentary makes the case that hockey as we know it was born out of a Mi'kmaq game. CBC Indigenous reporter Nick Maloney joins us from Halifax with more on this story. Hi, Nick. Welcome.
Hi. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, how did this question come up?
Well, it all comes from Mi'kmaq law professor and hockey mom Cheryl Maloney and her sister April Maloney. I should mention now we're of no relation. They spell their names differently. They're Mi'kmaq. I'm Wolastoqua. But Cheryl and April have been researching the idea and producing this documentary since 2014, and they're from Sipekne'katik First Nation. Now, Cheryl told me that the original idea came from a paper submitted to her by one of her students on the history of Mi'kmaq hockey sticks, and the Mi'kmaq have long been credited with the design and original manufacturing of hockey sticks in the game's early days. And Cheryl said that that's where they really started. They were curious about how that came to be. And she said, too, that as they started their research, a lot of her inspiration came from her 14-year-old son, Chase Nicholas. And he's been playing hockey since he was 3 years old.
I remember having a conversation with Chase one day, driving home, and saying, Chase, you can play this game. You know, because they're down on themselves. They don't think they're ever good enough. So you can play this game. You know, this is our game. This is a Mi'kmaq game. The Mi'kmaq invented hockey. So he always knew that, you know, there was claims of Mi'kmaq invented hockey. But you don't realize until we started looking into it, how much information and evidence is out there.
And that was Cheryl Maloney.
So what sort of evidence is out there?
Well, in 2016, Chase put together a timeline of the Mi'kmaq references throughout the recorded history of the game's developments in Nova Scotia. And it started with a quote from Nova Scotian author Thomas Riddall, who referenced a passage from a 1749 English military diary. And the passage mentions garrison officers who found what they called Indians playing a primitive form of the Irish field game, hurling, on the ice at Tufts Cove in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Now, unfortunately, Riddall didn't record who wrote the diary or when specifically they wrote it, but it looks like one of the earliest documented instances of the Mi'kmaq playing a game with sticks on ice. And that missing document is kind of a recurring theme in this Mi'kmaq origin theory. The Maloneys don't have much in terms of written evidence to support the idea, and that's, you know, likely because Indigenous history simply weren't documented in the ways that European history has been. But there's historical evidence from across Europe and North America showing versions of stick and ball games on ice developing all throughout the late 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, hundreds of years across the globe. But Cheryl Maloney says that she's unfazed by the other claims to hockey, such as Montreal and England. After all, the strongest evidence, she says, still points to Windsor, Halifax, and Dartmouth, otherwise known as the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq.
So there's nobody in the world, even though with similar games played everywhere else, there's nowhere in the world that is going to argue that hockey didn't come from the Mi'kmaq territory. From all of our research, it's a continuous connection to the Mi'kmaq people in the area, which is the Sipekne'katik district. It's not by non-native historians or academics that are going to say the Mi'kmaq invented hockey, because that's not where the evidence is. The evidence is with the Mi'kmaq people. The evidence is within our language, within our legends, within our stories. I'm confident that our ancestors and the oral history they shared and their conviction that the Mi'kmaq invented hockey and that we had this game long before the Palefaces arrived, I believe them. I believe them. And I have no reason not to.
Nick, Cheryl mentioned oral history there. What sort of stories are shared in Mi'kmaq communities about hockey?
Well, that's another interesting angle to the Maloney's research. In 1943, a Mi'kmaq photographer from Sipekne'katik named Old Joe Cope wrote a letter to the editor of a Halifax newspaper in response to the development of other hockey origin theories. And in the letter he wrote, I'm quoting here, "Long before the pale faces strayed to this country, the Micmacs were playing two ball games, a field game and an ice game, and an ice game," end quote. But while the letter's been cited by numerous historians, it appears that the original copy has been, unfortunately, lost to time. I tried to find the published copy in the Halifax Herald archives, but there was no luck. Without an exact date, it's kind of tough to find, and no one seems to have that date. So this is where it gets good. While the Maloneys were researching Old Joe's letter, they found an old hockey stick that he'd carved himself, and they found out that they were actually a direct ancestor of his. Old Joe Cope is Cheryl's great-great-grandfather.
It was interesting to see that Joe Cope actually not just wrote into the paper, but he would argue with anybody. till he was blue in the face that would have a discussion with him that the Mi'kmaq invented hockey. It just made us feel connected to the Mi'kmaq and our ancestors, more than the game or hockey, but connected to our ancestors, our territory, and the need to continuously make sure that it's documented.
So all of this sounds like a compelling tale, but what do the hockey historians say?
Well, I spoke to a fellow named David Carter about that. He's a communications designer for the Nova Scotia Museum, but he's been investigating hockey origin theories for a long time, and Mi'kmaq hockey sticks specifically, almost for a decade. He actually calls himself Hockey Holmes, heritage detective. And I met him at the Halifax Forum, and I asked him straight up, do you think there's a chance that Mi'kmaq invented hockey?
Again, I find invention a very difficult term because it requires a certain amount of proof, I think, to claim an invention. You know, today we call that copyright. Back then, there's no means of doing that. I think their game, whatever it was, influenced our game. Whether it was exactly like our game, I suspect not. It couldn't be like our game. They did not have steel skates. If they skated on bone skates. If they didn't skate, was it ice hockey? People have different opinions about that.
And Carter's a historian. He relies heavily on facts and data from documented history, and we know that there isn't much related to the Mi'kmaq theory. But he said that the evidence supports an origin story in Nova Scotia and that it did take hundreds of years for the game to develop into ice hockey as we know today. And he and I spoke for nearly an hour about the distinction between similar European sports like hurling and ice golf. And at the end, we both had as many questions as we did answers. But Carter's focused a lot of his work on the history of Mi'kmaq hockey sticks, and he said that that's where the most convincing evidence is that the Mi'kmaq could have played a bigger role in hockey's origins than we all think.
There's substance there. The oral tradition of the Mi'kmaq and anything that can be brought to bear from a modern context is really important and invaluable. And I have no idea that prior to hurling on the ice, the Mi'kmaq game, they were using crooked sticks. It doesn't take much imagination to move from crooked sticks to the modern hockey stick. There's a connection right there. So I don't think in a Nova Scotian context you can discount anything. We just seem to be an epicenter for evolution.
So a case for some connection, though he's not ready to call it a Mi'kmaq invention.
No.
But I take it that hasn't deterred Cheryl and her family.
You're right. It hasn't deterred them at all.
I think it's our duty and obligation for my generation and my son's generation to make sure that that continuity is there. There's going to be young Mi'kmaq people doing more research. They're going to be looking to our elders. They're going to look to our language. They're going to go through the National Archives. Right now, we're looking for a book written in Mi'kmaq, the hockey rules. We may not be able to find that for this film, but I'm hoping that we're playing our role to make sure that this history isn't forgotten and that they continue the story. I think hockey is such a beautiful sport that is a gift of the Mi'kmaq to the rest of the world. There's no taking that game or keeping it for ourselves, but I'd love to give pride to our kids and other Aboriginal children in this country to know when they step on that ice that came from the Mi'kmaq people.
Nick, whether it's true or not, what does more awareness around the Mi'kmaq's role in hockey do for the young people?
Well, when the cameras and the mics were off, Cheryl and I talked about how important developing a sense of ownership is when it comes to Mi'kmaq culture and way of life. Canada's history of colonization took a lot away from the Mi'kmaq First Nations peoples in general. So developing that sense of ownership, deeper connection to hockey and Mi'kmaq kids, especially, in any sport that encourages healthy lifestyles and teamwork, that is, forgive the pun, a winning goal.
We're all about the puns, Nick.
Great.
Thanks so much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
CBC Indigenous reporter Nick Maloney from Halifax. You can see more on this story online. Go to our website at cbc.ca/unreserved. As we've heard all throughout the show, for some Indigenous people, hockey has been one way of creating a life off reserve. In doing that, some have found they're pretty good at hockey, good enough to play professionally. But underneath the surface of success are the pulls to home. 2 University of Maine players made their professional debuts this year. Brady Keeper from the Pimicikamak First Nation made his NHL debut on March 28th with the Florida Panthers. Before that, though, he almost made a choice that could have jeopardized his chances at playing in the NHL.
At the University of Maine the next year, almost went home a couple times there. I think I booked my flights about 4 or 5 times in like a week, 5 days or something like that, canceling them and then doing all that stuff. But yeah, the coaches there at Maine were really helpful to me. I got a lot of support from them. In Maine there, I was just kind of homesick, I guess. But people kept reminding me just to keep going and all that stuff. I guess they said it would pass by, and when hockey came around and all that stuff, it was made easier for me to adjust. And obviously getting closer to the guys and coaching staff and getting comfortable around there, it was pretty easy after that. Most people don't know, I guess, coming from a First Nation community. I guess a lot of Aboriginal people are like that, and they're just afraid to leave home and get out of their comfort zone. But that's what I did, and I'm here today, and I'm just really thankful for.
Once Brooke Stacy, who is Mohawk from Ganawage, finished off her university career in Maine, the pros came knocking. She had her first taste of pro hockey this year, playing in a few games in Sweden for Linköping HC. She says she's unlikely to play overseas next year because of culture and language barriers, and she also wants to be closer to home.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly connected there because I'm really close with my family. So, I think my ties to the community is mostly my family, and I also have a lot of supporters from the reserve that have followed my journey through Team Canada and the University of Maine and Sweden. So I'm happy that I have so many supporters from the reserve. So I guess that's also a tie to them.
That pull home is still felt by Brady Keeper, even though he's made it to the big leagues. During his struggles in Maine, many people reached out to him to tell him things do get easier.
All the people phoning me, there was Jordan, like I said, Jordan Tutu, Aaron Asham, Cody McCormick. There was a bunch of people, Ted Nolan. They all phoned me there that one day where I actually almost left. Obviously, I still had times that I wanted to leave because I was still homesick, even though my girlfriend was here. And I think just getting reminded by my dad and all that stuff, just to keep going. And I guess other coaches saying how good I was and all that stuff. But I guess it was the right choice I made there, and that was the best choice for me. And that would have been probably the worst decision of my life if I left.
The people he mentioned, Jordan Tutu, Aaron Asham, Cody McCormick, Ted Nolan, are all Indigenous players and coaches. The Indigenous community within professional hockey is small and tight-knit. Keeper says when they spoke to him, it let him know he wasn't the only person who's felt like giving it all up and heading back home. But in that tight-knit community, there aren't many women with success stories like Brooke Stacy's. She hopes she can inspire the next generation of girls so they too can use sport to get an education.
I just want little kids to go after whatever they want to do, like if it's hockey or any other sport or just a career, just knowing that the reserve will be there and the people will be there to support you. And just with me, I had such a huge fan base just from my reservation, and it's just an honor to feel the support from them. I think it just goes to show that it's not just men that can make it to the higher leagues. Obviously for women, the highest is representing your country. And so I think just for little girls, it's you can make a career out of it. You can make money if that's what you want. So I think it's pretty cool.
That's Brooke Stacy, who just finished up her season with Linköping HC in Sweden. And Brady Keeper, who just wrapped up his season with the Florida Panthers in the NHL. That's it for this week's episode of Unreserved. We'll be back in this radio space next week for more community culture and conversation. This episode was produced by Kyle Musica, Stephanie Cram, Zoe Tennant, and Anna Lazowski. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at unreserved@cbc.ca or find us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm your favorite cousin, Rosanna Deerchild, coming at you from Winnipeg in Treaty 1 territory. Thank you for listening to Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. Agosay.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.